Hello, and today's lesson is on bar graphs. What is a bar graph and how do we use a bar graph? First things first, we're going to talk about the definition. A bar graph, also called a bar chart, is a graphical display of data using bars of different heights. How do we use a bar graph? We use a bar and the y-axis to determine the values of the independent variable. So a bar graph is on an x and y coordinate plane. It has a domain, or the x value, and has a y value, and the bars are what indicates the values of each individual piece. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at an example, and right here we have an example. The school bus team keeps track of how many runs each player gets. Use the graph below to answer the questions. We have 5 questions, all pertaining to the graph on the left-hand side. As you can see, the title to the graph is number of runs. The x-axis is labeled players' names, and the players' names are Mark, Tracy, Doug, Patty, and Sarah. The y-axis is labeled the number of runs. So each bar indicates the number of runs for each player. So we're going to use this bar graph to answer each and every one of those questions. So first things first, we're going to take a look at question 1. How many runs did Sarah have? Well, we're going to ask ourselves, how do we figure out how many runs Sarah has? Well, first, we're going to think which bar represents Sarah. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to find Sarah on the x-axis. And if we take a look, Sarah's all the way at the end of the x-axis. So we're going to mark that bar red, so we know that one represents Sarah. And the question asks, how many runs did Sarah have? So we're going to look at this bar and analyze it to determine how many runs Sarah collected. And we can do this by drawing a horizontal line from the top of the bar over to the y-axis to see what value that bar represents. So we draw that bar. Well, we'll draw the line, and we can see that that line is in between the 6 and the 8 on the y-axis. That means Sarah hit approximately 7 hits. So we're now going to record our value. So Sarah hit 7 hits, or 7 runs, in which that means our answer is 7. So to figure out the value of Sarah, or the number of hits Sarah had, we found the bar graph that represents Sarah. We drew a horizontal line to the y-axis to see what is the value that bar represents. In this case, it was 7 runs, and that was our answer. Right. So our answer for number 1, how many runs did Sarah have, is 7. Now we're going to go ahead and move over to question 2. How many runs did the player with the most runs have? So we're looking for the number of runs the most player had. So in order to figure out which player had the most runs, what we're going to do is we're going to find the tallest bar. The bar that's the absolute tallest is going to represent the person who has the most runs. So if we take a look, Mark is smaller than Tracy. Tracy is bigger than Doug, so Tracy is still it. Tracy is bigger than Patty's bar, and Tracy is taller than Sarah's bar. So Tracy has the bar that represents the most number of runs. Now that we have that, it wants to know how many runs Tracy hit. So we're going to draw a horizontal line from the top of Tracy's bar over to the y-axis so we can figure out how many runs. And as we draw the line, we see that it hits 12, so it's right there at 12. So Tracy had 12 runs. Now that we know that, we're going to record our value. Tracy hit 12 runs. So now we know our answer is 12. So this one wanted to know the most number of runs. So we found the tallest bar, which happened to be Tracy's. And then we just drew our line over to y-axis to figure out what that bar represents. In this case, 12 runs. Alright. So now we know how many runs did the player with the most runs have, and that's 12. So now we're going to bump over to number 3. How many more runs did Doug have than Sarah? So we're going to take a look at this question. And since it was talking about Doug and Sarah, we're going to need to figure out which bar represents Doug and which one represents Sarah by looking at the x-axis. So looking at the x-axis, we see Doug is right there in the middle, and Sarah's all the way at the end. So we're going to go ahead and shade those red, so we know those are the two bars we have to look at. Now, since it wants to know how many more runs Doug had, now we need to figure out how many runs Doug had and how many runs Sarah had. So we're going to draw a horizontal line from the top of the bar over to the y-axis to figure out what are the bar's values. So we draw them, and we see that Doug is between 10 and 12, so probably 11, and Sarah's between 6 and 8, so probably 7. Now we're going to go ahead and record our values, and we see Doug hit 11 runs, and Sarah hit 7 runs. Now that we have that, again, it wants to know how many more runs Doug had than Sarah, so we're going to have to figure out the difference between those two numbers, 11 and 7. So all we're going to do is subtract. Remember, difference means subtract. So we take 11 minus 7, which is 4, and that will be our answer. Doug hit 4 more runs than Sarah. So again, what we did is found Doug and Sarah since we wanted the difference between the two. Then we drew our horizontal lines over to the y-axis to figure out the bar's values. In this case, Doug hit 11 and Sarah hit 7. And then we just did our simple subtraction and ended up with 4. So how many more runs did Doug have than Sarah is 4. Alright, so let's jump over to question number 4. What is the range of runs? So, what is the range of runs? If you remember range, and just in case you forgot it, you can go back to the range video and review that. Range is the largest value minus the smallest value. So we need to figure out the largest value and smallest value, which in this case means we need to find the tallest bar and the lowest bar. So if you remember from a previous question, we already determined Tracy was the tallest bar, and if we take a look, the shortest bar there is Patty. So Tracy and Patty are the two values we're looking for. So we're going to highlight those red, because remember, range is the largest value minus the smallest value. Now we figured out which one represents the largest and which one represents the smallest. We're going to go ahead and draw a horizontal line to figure out what those exact values for those bars are. So we go ahead and draw it, and we see that Tracy represents 12 and Patty represents 4. Now that we see that, we're going to go ahead and record those values. So Tracy hit 12 runs and Patty hit 4. Now we can go ahead and find our range since we have our largest and smallest value. Remember, to find the range, all we do is find the difference, that means subtraction. So we're going to take 12 minus 4, and that's going to give us 8. So to find the range, we found the tallest bar and the smallest bar, drew our horizontal lines to figure out the values, in which case the tallest bar was 12, and the smallest bar was 4, and just subtracted and ended up with 8. So our answer here is 8 runs. So our range is 8 runs. So what is the range of runs? It's going to be 8 runs. Okay, now we're going to go over to the last question. What is the average number of runs? Alright, so what is the average number of runs? If you remember, average means mean. And again, if you forgot what mean is, you can go back and check out the mean video. But mean is the sum of all the data divided by how many number of data elements in the data set. Alright, so if we go ahead, first things first, we need to figure out what each and every value is in this set. So we're going to go ahead and draw lines from the top of the bars over to the y so we can figure out the values that we have in this set. So we go ahead and draw, and we see that from the bottom up, Patty is 4, so our first number is 4. Sarah represents 7, so the next number is 7. Mark represents 8, so the third number is 8. Doug represents 11, so our next number is 11. And our last number is Tracy, which represents 12. So now that we have those values, we're going to record them in a set. And we have our set 4, 7, 8, 11, and 12. So now we have our data set. So now what we can do is figure out our average, or in this case our mean. So in order to figure out our mean, remember, we're going to find the sum. That means we're going to add everything up first. So we're going to take the numbers in the data set and put a plus in between. You can type it into your calculator, or you can do it in your head. 4 plus 7 is 11. 11 plus 8 is 19. 19 plus 11 is 30. And 30 plus 12 is 42. Now that we have our sum, we're going to go ahead and divide it by how many numbers we have. And if we take a look again, we have 4, 7, 8, 11, and 12, which makes 5 numbers. So what we're going to do is take that 42 and divide it by 5, in which case we end up with 8.4. So our average, or in this case mean, is 8.4 runs. So to figure out the average, we figured out the value of each bar by drawing our horizontal lines to see what they are. Once I had our data set, we then added them all up together and divided by how many they were. So when we added them up, we ended up with 42. Saw there was 5 numbers in the set, so we took 42 divided by 5 and ended up with 8.4 as our answer. So what is the average number of runs? It's 8.4 runs. So to recap, how many runs did Sarah have? 7. How many runs did the player with the most runs have? That's 12 runs. How many more runs did Doug have than Sarah? That's 4. And what is the range of runs? That's 8 runs. And what is the average number of runs? That's 8.4. Alright, so right here we have a question. This one's for you. What I want you to do when I tell you to pause is pause this video, work on those 3 questions. Once you have your answers, I want you to unpause, and I'll have one more question for you. So go ahead and pause now. Alright, welcome back. So here's the last question. I want you to pause when I tell you to. Once you have your answer, I want you to unpause, and I'll show you the answers to the question. So go ahead and pause now. Alright, welcome back. So we're going to take a look at the first 3. Answer number 1 is 250, or answer choice C. Problem number 2 is candidate 1, or answer choice A. And problem number 3 is 600, or answer choice C. If you wish to read over how to do this, please read over from the PowerPoint that is provided, and there will be step-by-step instructions. Alright. Now, for the last question, the answer is 10, or in other words, A. And again, if you wish to figure out how we did this, please go ahead and look at the PowerPoint and read over the how to do. Alright. That's everything for today. Have a great, great day.